In this lesson, we want to focus our attention on understanding appropriate guidelines and principles that need to be in place for an appropriate IRT, and that is a incident response team. So we'll focus on the policies that are needed in order for that to occur. And so one thing that we want to keep in mind is that incidents response team has a crucial role in that it must be able to act appropriately if there is a breach in system security. And typically, if a security breach occurs, it could be an unauthorized user getting access to the system, or an authorized user sharing or damaging data unknowingly. So this can result in a lot of vulnerabilities and can result in problems that can affect the organization and can increase to a matter in which you are no longer able to control them. And so there's importance in having an appropriate incidents response team policy in place so that you can minimize threats and incidences that can negatively affect the organization. So in order for us to do this, we want to make sure that we are providing responses that are both effective and occurs in a speeding manner so that we can minimize any security threats and reduce any losses. And so in order for an organization to really be successful, it's appropriate to have well-prepared components in place for the incident response team to act accordingly. And this team will need to have appropriate supporting policies in place to ensure that the incident is quickly identified and it's contained. And so some key concepts that we want to keep in mind is that we are going to focus our understanding on describing different information system security policies. Key concepts that we'll focus on for this unit include incident response policies, team members and responsibilities associated with incident responses, the business impact analysis policies, procedures for incident response, business continuity plans, and as well as disaster recovery plan policies. So what we want to also keep in mind is understanding what exactly is an incident response policy. And by definition, we know that an incident response policy defines what an incident is and the criteria for activating the incident response team. So an incident response team is going to have to encompass several characteristics. It needs to be cross-functional. If an incident occurs and it affects the organization, then there are going to be various stakeholders that are going to need to be involved. An incident response team is also organized and coordinated. Organization is going to be key in having appropriate policies in place and having appropriate team members assigned to react if an incident occurs that violates one of those policies. Our incident response team is also going to need to possess various skills. So this means that all stakeholders that are a part of the team need to have a Swiss Army knife of different skill sets that will make them effective in responding to appropriate incidences within the organization. You also want to keep in mind that the incident response team usually only responds to major incidents. So if a minor incident occurs, it's considered part of the organization's normal operation. And so with this in mind, it's important that we have a incident response policy that is clear and concise. And you want it to be clear and concise so as to eliminate ambiguity, which can affect how appropriate incident response policies are carried out within the organization. We want to have minimal ambiguity so that the appropriate team knows how to act for specific violations. And so with this in mind, it must be able to clearly define when the incident response team should be notified or asked to become involved. So with this in mind, we want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of when that should occur. And so it's important to know that we have various types of security incidents. And so when we declare an incident and we need to activate the incident response team, we need to make sure that that incident is classified appropriately. And so the first way that we're able to classify the incident is we have to define an incident. And so what exactly do we mean when we say a incident has violated our policy? So we want to note that an incident is going to be in any event that violates our organization's security policies. Okay, so what might be some examples of those types of violations? The violations could include unauthorized access to a computer system. It could include deliberately causing servers to crash. It could include copying customer information from a database. It could include unauthorized use of computer systems for gaming, and it could also include unauthorized modification of data, and it could include a disruption of service. So it's important for us to have this formal definition of what exactly an incident is, so that we can appropriately respond and support our processes. And so once we have denoted what exactly an incident is, we need to keep in mind how we're going to be able to classify it. And so when we think about incident classification, what we want to do is consider if the incident is going to be a unique incident or one of standard. So if it's some kind of security breach, we need to classify it, and classification better helps us to understand what actions are occurring, what the actual threat is, and then from there, understanding what weaknesses might be evident from this threat. So once we're able to identify the type of attack that has occurred, what we want to do is determine an appropriate way in order to stop any damage or losses for the organization. So if we want to do that, we need to make sure that we are able to control the weaknesses in the environment. By controlling the weaknesses, we're going to be able to reduce the risk that could occur from future attacks. And so with this in mind, the key point that we need to take into consideration is we have to identify an appropriate approach that will meet our legal and regulatory obligations. So with this in mind, we might have an approach that is going to be able to completely analyze and break down the incident so that we can have enough detail. And once we have the detail, we're able to analyze weaknesses associated with this incident so that we can reduce any future incidents. And so in order for us to classify an incident, there are a few different ways in which we could classify it. The payment card industry data security standard provides for an understanding of some ways in which we're able to classify threats. In the PCI Security Standards Council, they develop a system that is based upon if an individual is able to gain unauthorized access to sensitive information. And so the attack vectors that were identified include SQL injection, improperly segmented network environments, malicious code or malware, insecure remote access, as well as an insecure wireless. And so with these different types of attack vectors, we want to consider what does each mean. SQL injection means that a modified structured query language has been injected into a website. And this allows for the website to be attacked by unfiltered input. The improperly segmented network environment is related to attacks that rely on the lack of partitioning or an isolating high-risk asset of their own network segments. The malicious code or malware attack vector relates to programs that have added to a platform without a user's knowledge. So these programs can damage the systems, they can delete files, and they can encrypt files. Insecure remote access is an attack that occurs from gaining access through remote services, such as point-of-sale devices, vendor networks, and even employee remote access tools. So if we have insecure wireless, then that means that an attack has occurred through the access of the wireless network from a specific point of entry. And so an insecure wireless network can lead to a variety of attacks because network devices are now more readily available and at risk. This can occur in various devices, including copiers, fax machines, inventory systems, POS terminals, web cameras, and more. And so once we are able to classify an incident, we're going to need to make sure that we have an appropriate way in which we're going to be able to assess it. And so our classification system should be based on the industry type and should meet our legal and regulatory obligations. We'll also want to make sure that we use appropriate categories for assessing the threat level. So if it's malicious code, we use this category to apply to a broad category for all code that causes harm. That could be including of Trojan horses, spyware, and computer viruses. Additionally, we want to consider if it's a denial of service attack. This type of attack is used by making the packets sent to the system to cause network and other computer components to crash. Unauthorized access can occur, and this is an exploit that is used in order to allow for unauthorized users to gain access. And then you could also have inappropriate usage. And so this occurs if you have someone that has appropriate access to a system, but they are not using it in a manner that does not violate company policies. And so this could occur if you're visiting websites that you're not allowed or inserting portable USB storage that can lead to malware. And so you also need to understand if it's a major versus a minor. So major incidents are going to be significant, and minor are going to be ones that are simply based off of the risk to the organization. So it's important that a incident response team develops an appropriate charter. So typically within an organization, a charter is in place before the incident response team can be formed. So the charter will be the basic document that is utilized in order to outline the missions, the goals, the authority of the team, and any committee members. And an incident response team charter is going to be important because this is going to provide for the appropriate language to ensure that liability for any incidents is minimized. So once a charter is written, there are a few steps that you need to take out. You'll need to determine the type of IRT model that you're going to use. And then there are several different types that can be utilized. It could be an incident response team that provides on-site response, one that acts in a support role, or one that acts in a coordinated role. And so if it's providing on-site response, and that means the IRT has the full authority to contain the breach. If the incident response team is going to act in a support role, then this means that the incident response team provides a technical assistance to those local teams on how to contain the breach. And if the incident response team acts in a coordination role, then that means that they are going to be coordinating with several local teams in order to contain the breach. So this provides for a couple of different ways in which an incident response team can be constructed. And then you have various sections that are going to be a part of the incident response team charter. This would include an executive summary. And the executive summary is what is in place in order to provide background on incident response and the importance of it to the organization. Essentially, the executive summary should be in place in order to define why the incident response team exists and the types of incidents that will be handled. A mission statement is going to be a part of that charter as well. This is going to define the overall goals of the incident response team. An incident declaration is going to be a part of it as well. This defines an incident and it describes how an incident is declared. The organization structure is how the documents in the IRT are aligned within the organization. Role and responsibilities are in place to describe the purpose and types of activities for each IRT team member. Information flow is a section used in order to disseminate information that is collected, analyzed, and communicated from an incident to upper levels of management. You'll have appropriate methods, and the methods define the way the goals will be achieved. And then you also have authority and reporting. And authority and reporting is describing the authority that the team has. This is going to be a section that defines the source of the incident response team's authority and who from upper management is the communication channel in working with the incident response team for specific regulatory requirements. So these are a couple of the basic things to take into consideration when you're going to develop an appropriate incident response team charter. There can be more components added or less. Typically, things related to budget aren't necessarily included in the charter, however.